Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I'm going to show you from start to finish how I slow stitch a project using a crayon image. It's just a custom image that I draw onto fabric using crayons. It's permanent because you heat set it. It's a beautiful way to custom make an image, either in the colors that you like or a complete image that's personal to you. I'll show you the process from creating that drawing step by step all the way to choosing my fabrics and then stitching them down to the piece and adding some stitches. Now, a lot of people ask, what is slow stitching? Slow stitching is just about the process of creating something with your hands. Some people knit, some people crochet. I like to hand sew or embroider. It's just about the process more so than the end result. That's not to say you can't get a beautiful end result, but it's about creating something and finding enjoyment in that creating process. And this is so valuable to me, and using crayons really allows me to enhance my work further. Throughout the video, I'll show different examples where I've used crayons as images to use in my work, and then I'll show you a few examples of how I've slow stitched them together into a piece, in particular into fabric pages. I like to create fabric books. Now, each page takes hours to complete, and each book, well, you can imagine, takes even more hours based on the number of pages. So I usually have a few books ongoing where all I'm working on is the pages, and then I'll eventually bind them together. But for today's video, let's get started creating that process so that you can learn how to create your own slow stitch pages using crayon images. So here's one example of a slow stitching project where I have one of the focal points made of crayon. So this mitten is a crayon drawing that I then embellished with different stitches and some other little felt objects, a ribbon, a little ruffle here, and some pearls. I made essentially a fabric collage, but I included a drawing that I used from crayon. This is a book page. It goes in a large fabric book that I'm currently working on. There's the back page. And today in the video, we're going to create the back page, and I'll show you the step-by-step from the beginning to the finished piece. So that's the size that I'm going to make. I wanted to show you some variations starting out this project. So in my video where I show how to use crayon on fabric, I show how you can just create something, a drawing, an image onto fabric. This is on a tea towel. So it's the crayon, then it's heat set. I use a paper towel to absorb the crayon wax, and then it's quasi-permanent. It can be laundered. I discussed that further in another video. I'll link them both below. Here's the original pumpkin that I made in the video, just on a piece of muslin. This is just a crayon drawing. Here's another piece. I call these my patches. This is another flower, and I can use these all in my slow stitching pieces. So here's a cupcake image where I took a piece of sandpaper, drew my cupcake, and really colored it in with a lot of crayon. When I transferred the image, I got this pixelated result. I think it's beautiful, and I'll use that in my work. Here's another example where I used a rubber stamp, and I just colored it with crayon, and I heat set all of these. This is some Aida cloth. It's for cross stitch. You can see the texture, and it makes a great pattern that you could then fill in with your embroidery floss. Now, these are just some other patches that I created using crayon on fabric, and you can get really beautiful results. Here I created these images. This one I traced on a light pad, and this one I used a stencil to get the shape. I colored them in with my crayon. Then I added additional stitching. So I've already started the slow stitching process here and on this one as well. Now, your elements don't have to be so intricate. You could just take a piece of fabric and create a simple shape, and now I have a little tab that I can use in my slow stitching, or a simple Christmas tree. You can embellish it with beads. Today's project, though, is going to be that full page book that I showed you. So let me show you my supplies. So to start out with, I like to start out with my image. You can reverse engineer this process by choosing your fabric and then making an image that coordinates with it. But I have a large stash of fabric, so I knew whatever image I created, I could find something that would work with it. So off camera, I drew this fish, and we're going to do that together here. I'll show you my entire process, and then I'll show you the steps to make that slow stitch book page. To make this fish, I just sketched the image. Now, this is heavyweight muslin. You could use a piece of sandpaper underneath your fabric to hold it in place. You could iron freezer paper, as I showed in the video, to give this fabric a little more tautness and texture. It makes it a little easier to color on. Or you could tape it down to your surface with painter's tape, and that's what I'm going to do. Now, none of these steps are required. These are just ways to make this process a little bit easier. Coloring on fabric is a little different than coloring on paper. The fabric has a lot of give, and it is going to give. You can also use an embroidery hoop to hold your fabric to keep it taut, but just keep that in mind when you're drawing on your fabric, that it will tend to give. So I've already selected my colors here, the blues and oranges. I have brown for the eye, a black and a white. And I also have my crayon sharpener, which is essential for making really interesting designs with crayons. So to start with, I like to take my color that I'm going to really focus on the fish, which is blue, and I make sure it's nice and sharp. It's okay. I like to make it really sharp, so I'll just tear down some of that paper, and then I just gently put it through the sharpener. And I get a much sharper edge. Now, some people save these shavings. They can melt them between pieces of wax paper or whatnot. And then from here, I'm just going to create my fish. I start with the blue as my color to make my outline. And I start with the body. So I'll just create that fish shape. It's kind of just an oval shape, just like this. And I give myself maybe an inch, half an inch of fabric on all sides so I can cut around it. Now for the fish shape, the lip kind of overlaps, creates kind of a smile, and I like that look. And then you can decide if you want your tail to be exaggerated or small. It's just a lot of variation. So I just kind of eyeball it. If I make a mistake, I don't worry about it. I just make it work like this. I'll work on my fins. I'll start with this fin below, maybe give it a little arch, second fin, and then my fin above. And I like how it's kind of a curved line. So it's not identical to the fish here, but it's a good inspiration. I like to start by drawing my eye as well. Just kind of make that rounded shape. And again, make that as large or as small as you want. And then I'll have my other fin here. Now from here, I want to just create my lines. Maybe a line here. I'll elongate that mouth a little bit. Create a little shape here. To create a little more detail, I'll just lightly take my crayon and create a few lines here, indicating the direction of the fin. And I'll do the same thing here. I like to just lightly create that shape where the body ends and the tail begins, and then I'll just alternate creating those lines. And I'm doing this very lightly because I know I'm going to add more layers. I'll come here, do the same thing, and the same thing here. This just gives direction, shows the fins where they're going. So now I'll take the same color and I want to create this little marking on the fish. And you could vary this. It doesn't have to look just like my fish. So I'm just going to come down here and make all these little C shapes. And then when I get to the face, just kind of come near the eye. Over here, I'm going to make my guide, and I know I'm going to go blue on that area. For the bottom, there's no blue, it's an orange marking. And then I'll work on the fins later. So right now, I'm just going to make a light layer in that area I drew of the blue. And again, it's very light. So once I have this part of the fish colored in, I'm pretty happy with it. I want to take my lightest orange color. I have 3 orange colors here, a dark, a medium, and just slightly lighter than that. So I have an orange, a yellow orange, and a scarlet. So I'm going to start with my yellow orange. That's the lightest of the oranges. It's very close to the other one, but I think it's a little bit lighter. And I'm just going to fill in the remainder of the fish, the body here. So I color the rest of that fish with the yellow orange, and I tried not to overlap with the blue. And now I'm going to go in with the next darker color, which is just the orange. And I'm going to trace out this little marking here, just the shape. So it comes out from underneath the fin, and it goes back here, maybe with a little bit of a shape. starts out narrow, gets wider, and comes over here. And now I'm just going to color that. Again, I want to make sure my crayons are sharp, particularly for the images and the fins. Now I'm going to take that scarlet color, and I'm going to just take my crayon, and using strokes, I'm going to go in the direction of that shape. So I'm going underneath the fin, coming around here. Again, always pulling my strokes to the left. I'm going to come in now just beneath this fin and just add a lot more color. I want it to be a little darker there, just creating a little shadow, and just gently blend it. So it's not a straight line, it just blends outward. And now I'm going to go back in with that orange color and just overlap just slightly. So again, there's not a lot of lines of color. I just want to overlap just the edge, maybe 1/8 of an inch. And then I'm going to come in here with my yellow orange, the lighter color that I started with, and just add some more depth of color just to the edge. And I like building it up in layers this way. I have a little more control, and I can decide just how much color I want. You don't have to make it this bright. You can keep it really subtle and light if that's what you like. Now with this yellow orange, I'm also going over the area where I colored the scarlet, just in case there's any little edges that didn't get filled in with pigment. Because the fabric is textured, some areas tend to skip. So now I'm pretty happy with the way this fish is coming out. I'm going to take my black crayon and make sure I have a nice sharp point. And now I want to create the little pupil here in the eye. So I make just a round circle and I fill it in, except for a little area that I leave white, just a little highlight. I'm also going to take my black and just gently create the outline to this fish. Very lightly, little strokes. It just makes a nice little border, but I don't want it to be a thick, dark color. So now my fish is really starting to pop. I'm taking my brown color. I'm using a burnt sienna. You can use any color you want. And I want to color in the fish's eye, but I'm not coloring the entire eye. I'm going to leave a little portion of it in the same area of the highlight. So on the right-hand side, I'm going to leave that uncolored. That's just an optional step. I like the way that looks. I don't want everything to look flat, so by leaving a little bit of the fabric exposed, I get a really interesting result. I have a darker blue here, Pacific blue, and now I want to follow those strokes that I made with the blue marks originally, but if I want to add a little more curve to them or I want to modify them slightly, I'll do that now with this crayon, this darker color. And I'll do that on the bottom as well, and the tail. I'm going to switch now to my lighter blue, the blue-green, and just gently, I'm going to fill in here inside these fins. About halfway. I like to leave a little bit of the fabric exposed. And I'll do that on all of the fins. So now I've added more of this blue-green to the fins. You can see some of this area here I didn't color in. So I want to just go back and add a little more pigment there. It doesn't have to be colored in 100%, but I don't want there to be any gaps that really draw your eye. Now for the tail, I want to do the same thing, but I want to shape the tail. I don't want there to be a straight line. I want it to curve. So I'm going to create some darker color, making that curve. Also going to now switch to my light yellow, the yellow-orange. I just want to pull in a little bit of orange on all the fins. So I'm going to start here and just on a few of them, pull that color up, just a few strokes. So I'm really happy with the way this is looking. I do want to add a little more depth to that blue. So I'm taking that Pacific blue and I'm just going to create a little border just up top around the body. I'm not going into the fins. And I'll do that the length of the fish. I'm making little rounded strokes here. I don't want there to be a solid line. Now I'm getting that nice rounded shape. I also want to come here and on each of these little sections, fill in a little dark color here. And now I'm almost done. I just want to go in there and see if there's anything I'd like to add. With my black crayon, I just want to add a little detail here to the fish. maybe a few little strokes on the fins. And I do think I want to take a little more of this blue on this fin and just fill in a little bit of color. I can look and see if I need it anywhere else. I'm really happy with that. So now I have to heat set this with a paper towel, and I have to make sure that my dye doesn't transfer. Even though I'm not going to launder it, I still don't want it to transfer in my fabric book. So my fish looks really good. It has a lot of wax on it. It's very vibrant. When we iron it, we're going to remove a little bit of that dye. So I'm just taking a paper towel here. I like to fold it over. And I'm doing the paper towel for two reasons. It protects my hot iron so that the wax doesn't melt on my iron, and it absorbs the wax as it melts from the fabric. So I just hold down that iron 5 or 10 seconds. Now the iron temperature is set for cotton because that's what this fabric is. And after I've pressed it, I can remove the paper towel, and you can see a little bit of that image. So that just means I have to do it again because I don't want to get any transfer. So I'll put my paper towel down, and I'll just continue to do this until there's no more transfer. So now I have my focal point that I'm going to use here, and I have my page. And now I just have to measure it to see how large the page is so that I can cut a piece of fabric to fit over that. Now you can cut fabric and have the raw edge showing, just as I've done here, or you can cut your fabric a little larger and fold over the edges so it's nice and neat. And that's what I did. So I took this fabric, this blue and white striped fabric, I pressed the edges to make like a square, and now if I flip this over, because this is where it's going to go, I have my basis for my slow stitching project. Now I could have had the raw edge showing, but I wanted the folded edge to show. I'm going to set aside this piece, this page, because I don't need this anymore until I'm going to attach it. And now I have my background piece. And now it's time to create the fabric collage. So I have my focal point, I have the embroidery floss, and some pearl thread that I chose that coordinate with the colors. And I also have additional fabric. And this is the part that I really enjoy, the fabric collage part. So I have just a few pieces of fabric. The colors are beautiful. My embroidery floss coordinates. I have the white that I'm going to use to top stitch the page onto the other page, so I'll set that aside for now. I have some pearl cotton that matches the fabric here around the fish. And I found these pearls in my stash, and I thought these would be great for making bubbles coming from the fish. I have embroidery floss that matches my other fabrics here. And now I can start planning my arrangement. So I really like the way the blue and this orange contrast. I just think it's beautiful. So I want to start with this piece. So I don't like this edge. So I'm just going to cut and tear some of it. So right now is just the process of creating the collage. I have my fish here, and I can cut around it, or I can just cut a patch, and I think that's what I'll do. So I'm just going to try and eyeball it. So I have my fish here, and now I have these other colors of fabric that I love. So I'm just really playing around here. I'll take a moment and just continue adding fabric here. So I like the way this is coming out. I'm going to pin everything in place, and then I'm just going to top stitch each of those blocks in place. So I'll go and start here with the fish, stitch around it, and then do the same thing with the remaining swatches of fabric. So now I've stitched around all the blocks here on the collage. It's starting to come out really well. You can leave it here, or you can just continue to do whatever you like. I definitely want to add the pearls in to look like little bubbles coming from the fish. So I have 3 big pearls and a bunch of little ones, and I'll kind of work my way up with that, but I'll do that at the end. Right now I want to start embellishing my actual patch here. So I took the blue embroidery floss, 931, just because it matches, it's a little darker. And each piece of embroidery floss is 6 strands twirled together. So I separated them so that I have 2 strands here and threaded it on my needle with a little knot at the end. And now I'm just going to stitch the outline of the fish, as well as some of these spikes inside each of the fins. So to do that, I'll just come in here and start making my stitches. Now I want the stitches around the fish to touch each other, so I'll do a back stitch. So I stitch one little stitch, and then I stitch in front of it, right on that line, and bring my needle and my stitch back to that first stitch. And I'll continue this all the way around the fish, and then I'll stitch some of the lines on the fins. And I'll do the same thing with a little bit of yellow. I'll add some of this yellow thread to the fins as well. And let me show you how I divide it. I have a length of embroidery floss cut here, and if you look closely, there are 6 strands. You just tap the edge, and the strands kind of come apart. You can see that they're coming apart there. So I just choose one at a time the threads that I want to use. Oops, there's 2, so I just want to make sure I grab just one and pull it out. And I want to use 2, so I'll pull a second thread out. I'll set this aside to use in the future. And now I'll just bring my threads together so that it's nice and neat, and thread it through a needle. Take my needle, thread it, make a knot at the end. I just wrap around the end of that needle a few times, pull it together. I have a nice little knot. So I'll do that stitching. So I finished stitching the fish around the border and some of the little fins here, and I added a couple of little places of stitching using that same thread. So I'm really happy with how it's coming out. I really love this. It's very simple. I want to add some of these pearls. You don't have to add anything three-dimensional. I just love the dimension, the little elements here. To stitch pearls or beads, you need to stitch and knot each one. So I want to make sure that it looks like it's coming from the fish. So I don't want to start here. I think I'll start maybe right here. So you have to make sure you have a needle that will go through all your beads. Now this is a larger hole bead, so that's not going to be a problem. But the smaller ones I'll have to test out because the beads are a little imperfect. Not all of them have the same size hole. So to stitch it, I'll come up through my fabric, stitch through the bead, and then just make sure it lies flat. And because this is a larger hole bead, I think I'll come up twice just to anchor it into place. Find the hole again. Stitch it back down through the fabric, and now I'll knot it on the back. I'm going to clip this one, re-knot my thread, and go to my next bead. So I added all my pearls. I love how they came out. They kind of draw the eye up and across. And now I'm ready to take my page and attach it to the back of my other page. So I have all my ends turned under. I even have some pins here to hold them in place. I'll find the exact spot that I want that, remove the pin, and just pin through both sides, through both pages. I'll take my white thread and just stitch a few stitches in between the pages. So that's the finished page. I have my little pearls, my stitched fish with little embellishments from the crayon drawing, additional stitching in the fabric collage. It's the back of the page with the crayon drawing of the mitten, and then the original fish that kind of inspired the entire page. I wanted to show you a couple of other examples of using the crayon drawing in your slow stitching. I have another full page with an owl that I drew out of crayon, embellished with stitches, then I added additional embellishments. This goes on the back of a page of little treasures that I slow stitched. So this is another page in that book. And again, I have little stitches as an accent. And then I have a little card that I made where I drew a landscape of a lighthouse, and I stitched in some trees. Then I stitched it around. So you don't have to make full page projects with your slow stitching. You can make little parts and little pieces, little things that are very fun. So that's how I use crayon images in my slow stitching. And that's an entire slow stitch page from start to finish. You can't necessarily tell that that image was made with crayons. And that's one of the things I love about working with the crayons. They're very fun and they come in an assortment of colors. I have additional videos showing techniques with the crayons and the fabric that I hope you'll check out as well. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. And thanks for joining me today.